Good afternoon, all. I welcome all the attendees in this fourth webinar by VJ Law Associates. The topic for today is migrant worker lost ground. The onset of COVID-19 has left the whole world in an unprecedented situation and a time of uncertainty. Most vulnerable in this situation are those poor workers who are dependent on their daily wages for this livelihood, and especially those who have been migrated to other places for work. With this lockdown, these migrated workers have suffered starvation, homeless situation, inability to reach back their hometowns. To discuss that, how this suffering could have been dealt with, and how these migrant workers could have been exercised their right in this difficult situation. Today we have with us very eminent senior lawyer, Shri Dinesh Dwivedi sir, who will enlighten us on this today's topic. Let me give an introduction of Dinesh Dwivedi sir. Dinesh Dwivedi sir enrolled as an advocate in 1978 and started his practice in Allahabad High Court. His father, Honorable late Shri S.N Dwivedi, was a freedom fighter, and after the independence, the Honorable S.N Dwivedi sir became Allahabad High Court judge and further elevated to Supreme Court of India. Dinesh Dwivedi sir has 40 years of experience as a lawyer, and his expertise in service matter, constitutional matter, civil matter, and education matter. He has appeared many popular cases as reservation and promotion matters of state of Karnataka and Uttarakhand MLA disqualification matter. Dinesh Dwivedi sir is also known for his fearless attitude and his always raise his voice against the social injustice. It is indeed privilege for us to have with us Shri Dinesh Dwivedi sir. I welcome you, sir, and over to you, sir.
Great person for it, but nevertheless, I was chosen. I may also compliment my young friends and congratulate them for having selected this most apposite topic of discourse and discussion, the most relevant one. Every day we watch on the media, the newspaper or the TV media, witnessing countless migrants trudging towards their roots, their homes. In their desire to reach or inch closer to their homes, to have the safety and security of their roots. The fact is that pandemic did play havoc with the informal economy. Both the informal economy in the urban areas, the industrial, and the agriculture. The follow-up of strict containment procedures, severe containment procedures like lockdown and social distancing, further exaggerated their difficulties. Now, these are, as Mr. Jindal said, daily wager kinds who have very little resources, have temporary jobs. They're mostly in the informal sector, in the urban areas or in the rural areas. And they are the first one to bear the brunt of any attack. The consequence of the pandemic was the destruction of the informal sector. And as a consequence of this, they lost their jobs, the temporary jobs which they had, the employment opportunities, the informal employment opportunities in the households in the urban areas. Therefore, what was the option available to them? Now, these severe containment strategies of lockdown and social distancing further created a deep doubt in their mind about how long will this last? How long can they survive? Because by all standards, as the experts on the migrants will tell you, that these people do not have resources to manage for more than a week or 10 days. But here was lockdown for 2 weeks, and with all expectation that it will go further. Then with the lockdown, the transport facilities of all kinds were also locked down. So what was the option for them? To trudge on the roads, the highways, the expressways, including the rail tracks, to reach or inch closer to their residences, homes, to derive some safety and security there. Now the question is, who are these migrants? What are these their characteristics? And why do they migrate? Now, before I elaborate on my discourse, I may let you know that the first part deals with the issue of migrants. Who are they? What are these? Why do they migrate? And from where do they migrate? Then the second part would be to show their status emerging from their migratory nature. Then the third part I have evolved would be a kind of a discussion on who is actually responsible to regulate and manage the migration, the provisioning for them. Who is responsible under the Constitution and the law? And the last part, which I could not resist, was, has the Supreme Court correctly approached this issue? Or has the Supreme Court failed to notice the real issue and therefore avoided dealing with it? Now, coming back to the first part, the migrants are those who migrate from one administrative jurisdiction to another. This can be to another district, another panchayat, or maybe to another state. In the present context, we'll be more concerned with the interstate migrants rather than the intrastate migrants, because they are far few in number as compared to the interstate migrants whom we notice every day. The fact of the matter is that the agriculture sector, particularly in the agricultural states of central India and the eastern India, there is heavy dependence on agriculture. Nearly about 40 to 45% population depends upon agriculture for their income and resources. It is heavily populated, therefore, these migrants have to march out of the safety and security of their homes. They march out, migrate, and emigrate to destinations outside their home. It could be within the state, it could be outside the state. As I said, we'll keep the within the state migration out for a moment. The migration that takes place is basically from one administrative jurisdiction to another in one state or any other state. They walk out because they want to eke out living, which they are not able to in their local setup. What really happens is, as per the opinion of the experts, that the migratory labor, virtually all of them come out of rural and the semi-rural areas, or call them semi-urban areas. And the migration takes place to the urbanized areas, the industrialized areas, or maybe some areas which are agriculturally more developed. So therefore, from the backward states like UP, Bihar, Jharkhand, Bengal, Odisha, Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh, which are principally dependent upon agriculture, these migrants emigrate to different destinations, which are relatively more industrially developed, have more job opportunities, employment potential, both formal and informal. But there is one factor which is important, and that is they have this migratory characteristic. And as I said, it is moving out of one administrative jurisdiction to another. There is no exact definition incorporated in any law, at least I couldn't find one, defining the migrants. There is one ancient law of 1979, Interstate Migrants Regulation of Employment Act, but that generally deals with migrants under contractors in building operations. That even does not define the migratory labor. So the only definition of migratory labor which I have put forward is the one which the census or the NSSO statisticians believe in, and the expert economists on migrants believe in. The migratory character, shifting to the destinations for employment. Therefore, the migrants are those who move from the rural areas or semi-rural areas to the urban areas and the industrialized areas. From a state like Bihar, UP, West Bengal, Odisha, they move on to states like Delhi, Punjab, Haryana in the north, Maharashtra, Gujarat, Andhra, Karnataka, even that far, they move to be absorbed in both the informal sector mostly, in both industrial as well as agriculture. The large proportion of them move to the urbanized areas, centers like Delhi, Bombay. The obvious reason is that they find informal jobs over there. The electrician, the plumber, the thele wala, the taxi wala, the person working in the shops and establishments. So much so that it has led the economists to remark that they virtually come to the rural areas, but have taken hold of the urban service economy. Now, the problem that is there is that there are two important characteristics of these migrants. One is that obviously the migratory character. They are born elsewhere, they live elsewhere, where they work. Consequently, their roots get disturbed and diluted. At the same time, because of their migratory character, they're not able to kind of create any kind of foothold or footprint in the areas of their destination where they emigrate. The consequence of these two factors, I mean, there's another characteristics which I may further elaborate on. One is the migratory character, and the other is that a migrant is one who invariably, after some time, maybe after a span of 6 months or a year, or maybe at times 2 years, goes back to his roots. And that is precisely the reason they are called migrants. They're temporary outing from their roots. But they invariably go back. That's their characteristic nature. Now, this part will explain to you who are migrants and why do they migrate. But then when I go on to the second part, which I would now go on, that would explain to you that because of these two essential characteristics of the migrants, they virtually remain kind of nowhere persons. As I said, born elsewhere, live elsewhere. At neither of the places they are able to develop any kind of solid imprint. Then they are least noticeable because the only way to capture them is through census or through some state agency like NSSAO when it prepares the statistics of employment. Neither of them fully capture because of these two factors. The census at the local roots fails to capture them because they have migrated to other places for making living. Likewise, NSSO also fails to fully capture them. The census and the NSSO fail to capture them at their destinations of work because they are from some other administrative jurisdiction. So consequently, all in all, they are not only nowhere people, but they become invisible. Invisible to the agencies, invisible to the government, invisible to the legislation. And that is why what we find is there is hardly any legislation to regulate the migratory labor. There is no provision, as far as I could search out, there is no provision which provides for registration of the migrants, either at their home states or at the places of their destination. So they remain largely invisible. So their characteristic traits are responsible for their invisibility. And that is why what we find is that the governments hardly put in any regulatory mechanism. They are hardly bothered. Their sufferings go unnoticed. For instance, look at this. This migratory worker, we see them all around us every day. We have been seeing them up now. But we hardly took any notice of them. My driver is a migrant. Your plumber who comes to your house is a migrant. The electrician, the fruit vendor from whom we buy fruits is a migrant. The flower and the fruit seller. The other part is that they come to the big cities, the urbanized areas, also for the sake of participating in the construction industry, which gives them immense employment. But the trouble is that because of their inherent nature and character, they stay either on the roadside, in the hovels, in the construction sites, or in the workshops where they work, and maybe in our houses where they work. where they are least noticeable. Now, as a consequence of this, what we have noticed is a gross ignorance of our government. Because my feeling was that as pandemic had impacted the informal economy, then the experts, if they were the experts in the field, would have told the government that this is one of the major consequences that will follow of the containment strategies of lockdown and distancing, or stalling the transport. After all, imagine when they lose the job as a consequence of the impact of pandemic on the economy, informal economy, with no resources left, what option do they have but to go back to their roots? But even that was stalled. According to me, it would have been far appropriate if the government would have appropriately notified them much before declaring the lockout. Now, I'm not going into the question whether lockout was declared a little late or early. Let's leave that, because something has happened. But surely lockout was not such a technical matter which should not have been informed. I mean, it wasn't like a trade secret or a technical secret of an aircraft or something like that, which you couldn't disclose. These people could have been informed that there is going to be a lockdown. And therefore, if you want to reach back to your roots, you can do that. And look at the advantage. At that point of time, all the transport vehicles were operating. The transport system was in full gear before the lockdown. They could have very well taken ordinary trains and gone back to their homes. At least most of them. But instead, because of the loss of jobs, because of the containment strategies, because of the termination of transport facilities, what we saw was, left with no option, they started trudging towards their homes on foot, on whatever other means they had, bicycles, carts, and so much so that I had seen some pictures where the ladies were carting along their children on their suitcases. This could have been avoided, according to me. But anyway, coming back to the issue, the cause of invisibility has been their bane. And then their invisibility is further evident from the fact that the government did not even think it appropriate to notify them, because they were hardly in the notice of the government. Now, let me tell you one interesting factor here. The government of India notified to the Supreme Court by means of an affidavit in the earlier litigation that there were about 40 to 50 million migrant workers. But then this is a gross understatement. Because when I talk to the experts, and when I see the expert literature on this, what I find is completely the opposite. According to the rough estimates of various experts who have been kind enough to enlighten me on this, there are approximately 400 million migrant workers. Now, I'm not concerned with entire 400 million because large number of them have a permanent footprint also, because they may be employed in permanent jobs in their destinations. But we are more concerned with the vulnerable category who were employed in the informal sectors on temporary basis, daily wage basis, or were self-employed, construction workers who change their residence with the changing sites, the household workers. Now, all these people deserved much better consideration, but were not taken note of at all when the lockdown was declared because of their invisibility and total absence of any law in this regard. So much so that for 6 weeks, both the center and the state governments dithered and bickered over who is to undertake the responsibility of transporting these migrants, provisioning for them. Now, can we imagine in any decent humanitarian democracy, this kind of dispute can occur between the center and the state? After all, we have a welfare constitution. Where was the welfare? The most downtrodden were not being taken care of. And the state, as well as the center, they were trying to wriggle out of their responsibility. This trudging of migrant workers, if I may define it in a more gruesome way, this trudging of migrant laborers for miles and miles together, for days and nights together, with or without food, virtually gave me an impression that it was kind of a long march of the tormented and the trampled. There couldn't have been a bigger misery. At least in my 67 years of experience, I have never seen such sights. This virtually reminds me of the migration post-partition. 20th century was the partition migration was the defining moment in the Indian history. Likewise, I believe this migration may become the defining moment in our history. After this migration may become the defining moment in our history of 21st century. But it all speaks of their invisibility, and which is the real problem. Now, to enlighten you with a couple of more facts on this, how wrong the government was in projecting the figure before Supreme Court. The rough estimates are, if I may indicate to you, about 55 million people 55 million people in the construction sector. The workers who sleep, migrants who sleep there and change their residence with the change in site, along with the contractor. They are virtually never captured in any of the governmental statistics. Then 35 to 40 million are in kind of self-employment in the urbanized economies. This is where they get absorbed in this urbanized service economy. And as I said, we hardly notice them. They are there for us, nothing more. About 10 million get absorbed in agriculture. All in all, the figure that has been projected by the experts in the field is about 12 to 15 crores of these migrants are really vulnerable temporary category, who are not only nowhere people, but invisible and therefore not taken care of. Now, from here, I travel on to the third part of my discussion. And that is who under the law and the constitution responsible, majorly and primarily. In my opinion, I have no doubt that interstate migration with which we are dealing today is a subject exclusively in the central legislative list. One, numbers walking on the road. There may be lakhs. Now, coming back to the responsibility part, it is definitely, undoubtedly, center's responsibility. The center deals with interstate migration. It's their exclusive topic. And not only that, interstate migration and quarantine is also part of it. Now, I'd read that with the right to food, Article 21 giving personal liberty, which is right to fair living, living with dignity, food, etc. Keeping in view the legislative topic being in the central list, the executive power is co-equal to that. My audio. Yeah. Sorry everyone. So the central government being the executive and the executive power being co-equal to the legislative power, it is the central government which is primarily responsible. There is no doubt about it. Central government cannot shift its responsibility. The states may, in their humanitarianism, chip in, help the center. But then the center has to look after, regulate, manage, and provide for the migrants. But what we instead notice is the center is trying to shift it to the responsibility to the states. The states, on the other hand, are throwing it back on the center. And as a consequence of which, these poor migrants are suffering every day. Now comes the last part, which was a little surprising and shocking to us, and that is Supreme Court is a sentinel on the key wave. Article 21 is at stake, right to food is at stake. Entry 81 list 1 is at stake. The question which the Supreme Court actually was confronted with was, who is responsible in view of this bickering going on? And it seems Supreme Court failed to notice this issue. Fact is, when the migrant issue comes to Supreme Court in the wake of what is happening around, then as far as I'm concerned, I could very well anticipate that this question is arising because neither the center nor the state is chipping in and discharging their constitutional obligation. So keeping in view this constitutional obligation, Supreme Court ought to have considered this matter in greater detail. It required looking into various laws. It required looking into various provisions. And above all, this issue, according to me, is res integra. Now, if in this situation, Supreme Court would not deal with this issue, then in which situation will it deal with this issue? Supreme Court completely missed the point and went on a tangent, I would say. It should have a relook. My advice would be, and request would be that it should have a relook, a serious relook. And I think with this, I would like to end my discourse. If there is any question, I would like to answer that.
I request all the participants, if they have any question or query, you just send in a chat, write in chat box only.
Yeah, I do know I am right, but what about that? Come on, fellows. Come up with some interesting question.
Yes.
Sir, Vishal Jindal is my name, and I am from the industry side. We are more into skill development activities, and I also chair a skill development committee of an organization called PhD Chamber of Commerce and Industries. Sir, first of all, I would like to compliment the organizers and your chair to organize this particular discussion. And henceforth, going forward, my specific comment would be that when we talk about migrants, there are two kinds of migrants apart from the characteristic of migrants, which you rightly mentioned, was, migrants who are working to organized industry and migrants who are working into unorganized industry. Sir, most of the people we are looking in TV channels, walking across the road, are from the unorganized industry.
Unorganized, you're right.
Which we assume is, not less than 70% of the overall migration workforce. It is just an assumption. But at the same time, we should also consider that there are at least 30% people who are migrants and working into organized industry. Why the notification from the Ministry of Home Affairs, they have mandated that the wages for the lockdown has to be paid by the employer, regardless of he's functioning or not, if his business is working or not, if he's making any profits or not. Which is a big question, which is also right now, in consideration of the Supreme Court, and I assume that the response from the central government is still anticipated, perhaps during the week. So that is perhaps apart from the point which, as you rightly mentioned, Honorable Supreme Court should have considered. This is also a very prevalent point that Supreme Court should consider that when a small industry who cannot make any profits, is not being able to make any revenues for the lockdown period. Please, sir.
Let me answer your question. I've got your point, and the point is substantial. See, today we are dealing with migrants who are walking down the roads, who are, as you said, temporary migrants of vulnerable category belonging to informal sector, not to formal sector. Now, those who are in the formal sector, they don't face this kind of a problem and they're not trudging along. So we will keep them out. Now, so far as the salary part is concerned, your concern is genuine. If the government wants you to pay salary, then my firm opinion is government must subsidize and contribute. If the government cannot contribute to the salary, as I'm told in UK and some other countries, then government has no right to ask you to continue payment. Because after all, how would you pay if there is no revenue? It's totally unfair. Right. Now coming to the query of Article 21, my kind of a submission would be that Article 21 guarantees personal liberty, but it has been interpreted in a wide manner by the Supreme Court repeatedly. It includes right to food, right to shelter, and right to decent clothing. Now, obviously, it has to be within the economic capacity of the state, but then economic capacity of our state is not so shallow that it can't look after these. Article 21 certainly deserves more respect and regard and more compliance in this kind of a situation where misery is writ large everywhere. So I think there is no doubt about it that Article 21 is attractive. Now the next question about the stopping of the migrants is violation of fundamental rights to move freely. Now, my submission here would be that there is no doubt that and as I had indicated earlier also, stopping of the migrants from moving to the routes was totally unjustified and unfair. It was arbitrary. A person with no employment opportunity, person who is disengaged, who has no opportunity to work, and no possibility in near future, what will he do? he will certainly like to go back because that is in his inherent nature. He has that character to return back to his roots. And that's what he's doing. And it was totally unfair. If the government was so serious, it should have given them prior notice, notified them at least 10, 15 days time before declaring lockdown. And then, therefore I feel it is certainly this lack of concern was in breach of Article 21 and the freedom of the migrant laborers. It was arbitrary, breach of Article 14, and in all other respects. No, so far as the package is concerned, I am not the expert in the economic field, so I would not be in a good position to reply to this question. But I can say certainly this much, that the package has nothing in it for the migrants whom we are seeing on the road. The package has all kinds of incentives for granting loans to set up or run the industries, small-scale industries, we call MSMEs. But then all that will have impact after 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, but not today. What is needed is the assistance today. And there is virtually no mention of anything with regard to the migrants on the road. That again proves my point that they are invisible men. The next step which you want to know, since the Supreme Court was hesitant in entering this field, as I said, my request is that Supreme Court should reopen the whole issue and have a relook, serious relook, because it involves much more important questions than it had in mind. No one pointed out also, to be fair to the court, that even the lawyers there did not raise these issues. But then I recall when I started my practice in the year 1978, 79, the judges used to say that facts we should be informed, law we know. But I don't know if that is the right way to look at it. Then the judge should have known this. And if I can know, or perhaps you can know, then why can't the judge know? It's difficult for me to and perhaps accept this. But anyway, I'll give the benefit of doubt. But then that benefit was available to the judge only if he reopens the matter and looks into it seriously.
Sir, I think we have so many questions, so many queries. So I just requesting all the participants, please, you can mail us your queries. It will be answered as per after discussion of the Honorable Sir. Now it is, I think, this session is really enlightening us with the view of given by the Honorable Sir.
Please let me thank you also for this important issue being discussed today. And I thank all the folks who have joined me in discussing this or listening to me. I'm truly grateful.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir, for this inciting session. And thank you all for participating and posting your queries. A recorded video of this webinar is available on our social media account, platform like YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn. You can go there and you can see the whole recording. Thank you, sir, and hopefully we'll again come with the sir on some other important point like this, and sir will again enlighten us with his thoughts. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.